Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay, and today we've got a very special guest. Since we started Conscious TV a few months ago, the number one requested guest in the consciousness section is Tony Parsons, and we're very lucky to have Tony here this morning. Good morning, Tony.
Hi.
And we're just going to talk a little bit about your life and your work and see what happens, see where it goes. We've got an open space for 45 minutes or so. So I'm just going to start, Tony, asking you a little bit about your childhood. I know when I was reading The Open Secret last night, you were saying that when you were very young, I think 3 years old, you did feel a sense of oneness, but then that went at one point.
Yes, it's what happens for most people. Initially, as far as this perception is concerned, as a very young child, a tiny child in iron arms, really, there is just beingness. There is no sense of identity at all. And then what happens with most people is that that beingness, which doesn't identify with anything, suddenly recognises another identity. So it's suddenly an identity, say the mother, appears. And directly the mother, let's say, appears, there's a sudden sense that there's someone here.
So that's when separation emerges in one way.
That's the beginning of separation.
Yeah.
It is not a thought, it's just a sudden sense that there is now someone else in this beingness, in this wholeness. And when there's someone else in this wholeness, suddenly there's someone here. And this is the first identification. And that is the beginning of what I call the dream of individuality, where that identification takes place, and then there's a sudden contraction of energy which makes that child think that they live in a body and everything that's happening outside them is something else. So that from then on there's separation, and directly there is separation, there is seeking for wholeness again.
So you're trying to find what you had, and in one way you lost.
Yeah. Well, you didn't really have it, really. No one has wholeness. There is just wholeness.
No, I understand.
And what seems to happen is that in some way or other there's a sense of separation from wholeness, and we grow up in a world full of individuals who actually in the end feel separate from wholeness.
And there's, in all of us, even though we're not necessarily aware of it, there's this feeling of this is not quite it.
Absolutely.
And that's where seeking starts for most of us, yeah.
There's a sense of having lost something, and there's a sense that the individual has to find it, and that's the misconception.
Yes. But you actually do remember this time when you were 2 or 3 years old to some extent, and that's great because in a way it's a reference point that's maybe helpful.
Certainly I can remember actually not as 3 years old, but more 7 years old, when I was then a person.
Right.
I still felt that everything that was happening was somehow saying something other than me being separate. There was something that was being said in everything that was inviting me to see that there wasn't any separation. It was just a sense. I couldn't, at that time, conceptualize it in that way. I just have. But there certainly was a sense that if there was a God, and of course as a tiny child you think there's a God, if there was a God and he loved me, then he would be talking to me in every way, through my body, through everything that was out there. It was just an idea, it was just a sense of something.
Right. And I know also something I read, that when you were in your teens, you investigated Christianity. You were somewhere drawn to that for a time.
Yes, I certainly was then a seeker like everyone else. So I looked at Christianity as one possibility, the answer to what I was looking for, and spent quite some time looking at that, a few years, looking quite intently at that possibility, and then I just discarded it. Because somewhere for me, it was still saying that in some way or other, I had to become worthy to be whole.
You had a baggage attached to it,
Yeah, there was a whole baggage and lessons and teachings about how I should become worthy to become everything or to become whole. Yeah. And it just, in the end, just fell apart for me. It just didn't mean anything. So I then looked at other things.
What kind of other things did you look at?
Osho.
This was still in your teens, or this was later on?
Osho was later on.
Yes,
I looked at Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, all of that lot.
Yeah.
I was looking here and there at various different ideas about this.
Yeah.
And then later on, I left my previous life and went to the Osho commune for about 3 years. But near the end of that 3 years, I then saw that in a way I was still being given a list.
Yes, yeah.
You know, go to therapy, meditate, all the different things that dear old Osho, bless his heart, in a way was recommending. So then again, I knew there was something about that just didn't ring a bell.
So when you were around 21, I think, again, I read somewhere that you one day you were walking on Park in Balham in South London, and you said something to God, "Show me your face."
Well, there was that intensity somewhere in me, and I was walking across the park, and although at the time I thought I was doing it, in fact there was a noticing that every footstep was uniquely different and never would be there again. That was all that came into me. I wasn't doing that. It was just an idea or a sense that everything was totally new and unique. And suddenly I wasn't there anymore. So there was Tony Parsons. And there was nothing. There was no Tony Parsons. There was nothing. No experience of it. There was no experiencer. There was just nothing. Bang.
Right.
Or absolute love, if you want. And then I walked out of the other side and I was still a seeker. I was still seeking. And what I now wanted was that.
You wanted to get back to that
I
feeling
wanted
as
to get
a
back to it,
seeker.
although I couldn't know it. I wanted to get back to that. So I then went on in various other ways to try and really, in a way, remember or grasp what couldn't be grasped.
So it's like a reference point somehow.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about a reference point. I think a lot of people have glimpses of oneness, let's call it, or wholeness. And then there's something that's recognised there, but when they come out of the other side of that, they then think that they can get to that, which I thought. They then think they had to find that and embrace it.
Yeah.
And then much later on, what actually happened was that there was an individual seeker looking for this, and then suddenly there just wasn't.
Yeah.
It was over. There was no individual seeker. And what came out of that was the open secret. And also, I have to say, not for anyone, but the realization that the whole idea that there is something called an individual seeker that has to find something else called enlightenment is totally misconceived.
And how did this realization, change, whatever you call it, happen? And what was the circumstances?
Well,
were you looking more intensely than usual?
No, the circumstance was that I wasn't anything anymore. There was no individual. What I call liberation happened when I was much older. And when that liberation happened, which was the end of there being any individual seeker, it simply collapsed. And there was nothing left. We can talk about that in a minute, what that's like. There was nothing left. There was no individual. There was only what was happening. There was only life. But in that, there was a realization that the idea that an individual had to make effort or purify themselves or become worthy to find this was completely and utterly misconceived.
But what I'm particularly interested in, as an individual beforehand, were you looking particularly intensely to try and find something, or was it kind of some people say they give up and something happens? What was kind of going on with you as an individual?
Okay, so as an individual, about a year before this happened, I wrote a great big thick book, which I never published, which was full of lists.
Okay.
It was really talking in the same language. I'm an individual, and and maybe I can find this, and maybe you can. And then I suddenly realised, like the Osho thing and the Christianity, that the whole thing was ridiculous. That wasn't it. That wasn't the answer. I threw the book away and went and played golf. So there was no sense.
Don't touch the microphone, otherwise it'll...
There was no sense, anymore that what I thought I could find could be found by me. So for a year, I just played golf. I just played around. And we had a business that we were running, but I was doing nothing in terms of seeking in that way. Although subtly, of course, we're all seeking.